Newt Gingrich is having his moment in the sun. Set the table for us. Newt is now tied in the polls, and there's one poll in New Hampshire. We can talk about that in a minute, which has them tied. We don't know whether we believe that poll or not, but he's having his moment.
Yeah. The most remarkable thing about this campaign to me has been the degree to which it has taken place entirely on TV and online. And a TV campaign benefits those performers who are good on TV. And I'm speaking, of course, of these debates that have defined this primary campaign like nothing that we've seen in previous cycles, and on the strength entirely of his debate performance and on the promise of how he could take it to Obama next year in debates. Newt has come back from the dead. And I think it shows how much the Republican base wants to nominate someone who can beat Obama, or they at least think could go toe-to-toe with Obama. That is, I think, that explains Newt's rise here. The question is, can he hold it together? Is he peaking too soon? It's a long ways between now and Iowa and New Hampshire, and especially if you're Newt, who himself has admitted in the past that discipline is often a challenge. But I think right now it's increasingly, it seems like Newt's in a pretty strong place. Poll after poll shows that despite a lot of TV ads, Perry's numbers are not moving back up. So the only constant in this campaign has been change. Right. So it's too soon to say that it's going to be a Newt versus Mitt race, but I'll tell you what, at this point, that's how it's shaping up.
Marc Ambinder, how do you see it? The Gingrich comes in a line here from Bachmann to Perry to Kaine of the non-Mitt Romney candidates. Each Kaine and Bachmann rose and fell in about 2 months. Perry's rise and fall was about 3 months. Gingrich is into about month 2 of his rise, if you start from the moment when his polls actually started to tick upwards. Right. How do you see it? Is he going to be able to survive where the others have not been able to?
Well, he might have a chance of doing so. You have all this energy on the conservative side of the Republican Party that is channeled into, concentrated on one candidate who implodes. But of course, laws of physics, we know you can't get rid of matter. It's just conserve, transfer to something else. In this case, finally, now it's on Newt Gingrich. The reason why Gingrich might be somewhat successful, at least over time where the other candidates haven't, is that, look, the last time he peaked was 1994, and then he fell in 1996, and he's back. And he knows how to do this. He knows how to debate on television. His vulnerabilities, for the most part, have been out there, although he's now wrestling with a couple of new ones, including some of his interesting strategic partnerships. But in some cases, I think 2 decades, no one has defined how Republicans approach politics more than Newt Gingrich. He knows how to appeal to conservative voters. He knows particularly how to trigger that anti-elitism instinct that really gels and energizes and really gathers the energy of conservatives. So I think that's, and in the absence of anyone else, although we did hear today that, again, faster than light particles were detected, so maybe matter can create some sort of new candidate we don't know about yet. But in the absence of that, Gingrich, for all the other potential options, it is not a bad guy to have as your last anti-Romney left standing.
Michael, though, as one Republican said, the oppo work that you do on Newt Gingrich is just with Google. I mean, he spent a lot of time in the wilderness where he wasn't necessarily worried about his long-term political viability. He'd left Washington under a cloud. He worked for a lot of these different companies.
Hadn't actually left Washington, though.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's right. He left the Capitol, right? Just moved a few down the few roads.
And that's the thing. Right now, we're focused. The media is focused a lot on this. What he actually did when he was in the consulting business, who he worked for, how much of a Washington insider he is, and we're all waiting for his next big flub, mistake, the outburst that will bring him down. But on the issues, he's really not that great for a lot of conservative voters. Right. I mean, if you just start laying this stuff out, whether it's on global warming, on immigration, he's for a version of amnesty, on he flamed out last time because he was criticizing the Ryan plan. I mean, like on almost every one of these big issues, he's going to now get scrutiny that he just has not gotten for months, and that will start to eat away at him. And the moment one of his rivals or one of the super PACs starts throwing up negative ads, saying, "Do you really know Newt Gingrich? Do you really know who this guy is?"
It's so fascinating, because what really hurt Rick Perry before even some of his debate performances was the fact that a lot of conservatives had fallen in love with the idea of him, but once they learned about his stance, especially on illegal immigration and that in-state tuition legislation in Texas, they were really aghast. But Michael raises an interesting point. Perry was an unknown quantity for a lot of conservatives. A lot of conservatives feel like they know Newt. So how much new information out there is there to dissuade them? It's going to be a great test, because you're right. On a lot of issues, Newt is not a doctrinaire conservative, but how much of this is going to persuade conservatives here?
Right. Mark, jump in here. You were going to say.
I was going to say, I think that both Mike and John are exactly right in this sense, which is most conservative primary voters have a strong sense of who Newt is. So how do they incorporate all of this new and somewhat conflicting information about who he is? In most cases, if they're human, like everyone else is, they'll go for the Newt that they know, which I think is, again, one reason why he has more staying power than some of these other guys and gals.
And also, just the culture of the Republican Party is just wired for known quantities, people that they're familiar with.
But this is what confuses me, though, because we've just gone from the flavor of the month being not a known quantity. Kaine, who was not experienced at all in the ways of Washington, in fact, got a huge applause line because of that.
But the instinct to beat Obama trumps this demand for an outsider. There are competing instincts right now in the conservative movement. One of them is for somebody who is new and fresh and a political outsider. I think that helps us explain the rise of Kaine. But my argument would be that the more compelling feeling right now among conservatives is we got to beat President Obama. And that, I think, explains Newt's rise. And like Marc says, may ultimately explain why Newt has the most staying power.
But in Chicago, they would love to run against Newt. I mean, like, that would be a dream for them. I mean, it crystallizes.
His name even right now.
Yeah, they're not running it.
Let him get the nomination. Marc, you were going to say, are they mentioning his name now?
No, they're not. I mean, there's one name I heard out here, and it begins with an R.
Yeah.
So.
Romney. Meaning, Michael, you were going to say.
Good guess.
Yeah, thank you. I have a grasp of the obvious.
I wonder. I mean, what John said earlier about this whole race coming down to debates is we are in a sort of reality show culture.
Yeah.
We have basically a reality show presidential campaign, and my gut is that Newt is more the reality show character. Like Sarah Palin was, like Herman Cain was.
Yeah.
He performs great in those debates. He says things, he's constantly condescending to everyone around him, so he's very entertaining. He says things like, I want 3 hours of unmoderated debate
Lincoln Douglas
debate with Obama, which will never happen. And that when it comes down to it, the reality show, and this is the Romney bet, the reality show is not going to be what people vote for. People enjoy the reality show a few months out, they enjoy it 6 months out, they like watching it on TV, but when they go to the polls, they're actually going to be voting for someone they can see as president, they can see actually beating Obama, and Newt's going to have to overcome that. He's going to have to leave the sort of reality show world that he's in. He's going to have to show that he has a campaign, show that he can raise money, show that he can actually be a politician again, not just a sort of leadership speaker who does well on TV.
We'll put Gingrich.
Which very briefly is one reason why Mitt Romney is taking another strong look at Iowa, because Romney is calculating if he goes in Iowa and actually shows that he can campaign there, he's going to get he's going to get a second look from a lot of conservatives who would have given him, who mistrust this reality show primary, giving him a second look, even though they don't necessarily trust him too. Because they respect people who campaign.
And look, if Newt comes out of Iowa with a head of steam and goes into New Hampshire and becomes Romney's top challenger in New Hampshire, and even if he loses to Romney in New Hampshire, but it's less than 10 points, you've got a Newt win in Iowa and a narrow-ish Romney win in New Hampshire. You got a race on your hands.
You do, and in South Carolina, Newt has
right.
strength in South Carolina. Having been in there last weekend. One thing that's interesting, also, it seems to me, for Gingrich's standpoint, is we've talked here about how he appeals to those who want somebody who's electable. Kaine never did. Perry had trouble with those people, so he is eating into something Romney had, which was the electability issue. And also in the CBS poll from last week, when we asked people, who do you trust in a crisis? Who came out number one? Newt Gingrich.
Yeah.
So he's stealing from the Romney base, not just like some of these other non-Romney candidates who've taken just Tea Party votes and rearranged them.
And you talk to voters on the trail. I think Steve Hayes mentioned this. Every time you bring up Newt, the response is almost the exact same, and that is, a sort of gleam in their eyes, and they say, imagine him debating President Obama. I think conservatives have been frustrated by the silver-tongued president for the last 3 years. The obsession with the teleprompter on the right is, I think, a way of trying to rationalize how this president has beat them and how he's so good. But here is somebody in Newt Gingrich who doesn't need no teleprompter, who can go after this president and beat him where he is, which is in eloquence and in speech delivery. And that, I think, offers a very powerful sort of incentive for conservatives to give Newt a long walk.
And he can opine on brain surgery. It will.
Ed, we're going to do a bit of a lightning round here because we have other candidates I want to quickly get through. Marc Ambinder, let's talk quickly about Herman Cain. He got Secret Service protection this week. Is that early? Is that odd? Why did he get it?
Not particularly early in the history of the 80-plus candidates who have gotten Secret Service protection. Basically, his campaign requested it. Secret Service has been doing an ongoing series of threat assessments of all the candidates since the summer, and a bipartisan congressional panel concluded or concurred with the Secret Service recommendation that it was probably time to give Herman Cain Secret Service protection. He also met a threshold. You have to essentially have at least $2 million raised, be competing in 10 states simultaneously, and then Secretary signed off on it. He has it. Any candidate who is above that threshold that I just talked about, who requests it, will get it regardless 1 month before the first primary or caucus. But I would, in the next couple of weeks, I mean, you'll probably see Gingrich and Romney both get Secret Service protection either. So far as I can tell, there's no specific threat to Cain that anybody should be worried about. But it's about time for candidates like him to start getting protection.
Jonathan, that's his the threats to his physical body. What about the threats to his political viability? His poll numbers have been dropping. He's had trouble on questions about Cuba. He had a disastrous moment being asked about Libya. What's the trajectory for the Cain campaign?
Well, right now it appears to be downward. Speaking of the Secret Service protection, as Marc lays out there, perfectly logical for a candidate at this hour to get a detail. But then, as is their pattern here, the Cain campaign makes this a story by saying in today's Washington Post that, yes, we asked for the protection because the press is getting out of hand at our events. Basically saying they asked for taxpayer dollar protection to serve as their press wranglers, their press handlers. It's just astonishing. Almost every single day now there is some news story or some quote that is really remarkable.
Who would have guessed that 3 weeks ago? Who would have guessed 3 weeks ago that today sexual harassment would be the least of Herman Cain's problems? I mean, you've had literally every day another.
I wouldn't say it's the least of his problems.
But like if you're going to rank the big news stories of why Herman Cain, American people are thinking Herman Cain is maybe not presidential. That's 2 weeks ago's news. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 things that have happened since then that rank up above that.
But the common thread
we need a new plot.
The common thread is self-inflicted damage.
That's right.
The response to the sexual harassment story, the Libya response, the issue of the Secret Service, the response on Cuba.
Yeah.
It's just all compounded by both Cain himself and his campaign.
It turns out it's not that easy to run for president just out of the, just walking off the street.
Seat of your pants, yeah.
Marc, let's end all three of you on Ron Paul here, which is, what strikes me is that we now have 2 polls, or a few polls here, the Bloomberg poll and others, that show him moving up in both Iowa and a little movement in New Hampshire. What interests me, and tell me if you see anything interesting in here or not, is that he had been stuck at about 13%, kind of a ceiling in Republican politics, while all these other candidates were having these bunny rabbit moments where they were hopping up into the polls. Polls seem to have kind of a ceiling on him. Now that ceiling seems to have been broken a little bit. He's among the 4 top folks in Iowa. Is there anything new happening here, do you think, Marc, or what do you make of Paul at the moment?
I don't think there's anything that new. I think some of it is just natural drift away from some of the other candidates, of some of the more libertarian-leaning conservatives. But fundamentally, Ron Paul has roughly the same ceiling that he had in the Republican primary with the electorate, given the positions that he takes. Now, I could be proven, and I'm totally willing to be proven completely wrong. But that's what my gut's telling me.
Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree he has a ceiling, and also he's still sort of a protest candidate within the Republican Party. He's the guy, I mean, there's a core of hardcore libertarians who actually believe what he believes, but for a lot of Republicans, he's just the guy who you go to because you want more purity more truth. He's not really the guy you go to because you want him to be president.
Jonathan, last word to you.
Keep in mind on Ron Paul, he's been on TV for the longest of any of the candidates. He has had a sustained blitz on the airwaves in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. If you look at some of the state polling, I think that explains his rise. And his ads have been mainstream Republican ads on issues like abortion that are portraying him in a way that the candidate himself doesn't often portray himself on the campaign trail. I think that also explains his strong numbers.
That's
here.
right. Much more on message than he is.
Right.